Hi, my name is Cathy Hart and I'm a GP partner at Affinity Care in Bradford. On the 27th of April 2021, I chaired a panel entitled My Female LGBT Hero. This was in honour of Lesbian Visibility Week. It also was a follow-on from a panel we had just done after LGBT History Month where we had 4 male heroes. I was very fortunate to be joined by Jude Faulkner discussing Billie Jean King, the tennis player who, when she was 29 years old, beat 55-year-old Bobby Riggs in the infamous Battle of the Sexes tournament in 1973. We mentioned both the 2013 documentary and 2017 Hollywood film of this match, both called Battle of the Sexes, and links to these will be in the description. We were so honoured to be joined by Thompson, who is one of our receptionists. She discussed 2 photographers, Joan E. Byron and her work Eye to Eye, Portraits of Lesbians from 1979, and Cindy Sherman. She also referenced an essay by Laura Mulvey titled Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema. Links to all of these will be in the description. We had the privilege of being able to see some of Bailey's own work entitled Female. Although this doesn't work so well on audio format, you can hear us reflecting on the powerful images that she has captured of sexuality and feminism. This prompted a discussion about how much art should provoke a visceral reaction and how much we should warn about potential explicit content. Although Bailey's work isn't anatomically explicit, she uses fruit to depict the female genitalia and bodily processes, including menstruation, and the images she has created are really powerful. I discussed the amazing medical trailblazer Sophia Jex-Blake, who was one of the first female doctors in Britain, and you should really listen to how she broke down barriers at every point in her life. We were joined by Nicole, Rick and Sara, and you will hear their voices throughout. As always, our discussion took us in many directions. We discussed the arguments for whether personal diaries should be made public posthumously, and if so, how much should society and relatives deem suitable or acceptable be taken into account when censoring sexual and emotional content. We discussed how much women are thought of as entertainment for straight men, including referencing the case of Melania Geymonat and her partner that occurred on a London bus in 2019. They were attacked by a group of teenage boys because they refused to kiss each other. The boys threw coins at them, made sexually explicit comments and gestures, and then physically assaulted both partners. Our conversation was so diverse in what we covered, I hope you find it as interesting and enlightening as I did. Good evening, everyone. My name is Cathy, and my preferred pronouns are she, her. Tonight, it's my great pleasure to present our panel on female LGBT heroes. This is because this week is Lesbian Visibility Week, and this has been an event since 2008. There was a survey conducted by Pride in London in 2018 that showed that gay women are almost twice as unlikely to be out in the workplace as gay male colleagues. So I think lesbian visibility is a really important thing, particularly in the workplace, but in any place. Our last LGBT hero session was great, but we did in fact have 2 male gay panelists. So it is my great pleasure that we can see the other side of things today. Today we've got Jude, we've got Bailey, and for once I'm also going to talk about a hero of mine. I shall let you both introduce yourself and then we will continue. So Jude, you go first.
Okay, so I'm Jude. I identify as she, her. I was going to talk about Billie Jean King. So has everyone heard of Billie Jean King? Yeah, I'm just a bit concerned that I'm talking about somebody quite old and Bailey might not have heard of her. You haven't
well, the important thing about these heroes is that sometimes they're unsung and it's important to make them visible again.
So Billie Jean King was born in 1943. She started playing tennis at the age of 12 at the Long Beach Tennis Club and was particularly struck that everything was white. There were no coloured players at all and everybody was wearing white games kit. She didn't feel that this was fair, and so from a really early age she felt that equality and discrimination against people was something that she felt very, very strongly about. And she very quickly realised that the standards that are set for men in tennis as opposed to the standards set for women at that stage were very, very different. She became a professional tennis player at the age of 16. She got married to a man called Larry King when she was 22, and he'd been a fellow student at the university she was at. She won Wimbledon for the first time in 1966, and that year she was also ranked as #1 in the world for the first time. So that was at the age of 23. In 67, she won all 3 Wimbledon titles, so the women's singles, the women's doubles, and the mixed doubles. Can any of you guess what prize money she might have been awarded for winning all 3 Wimbledons back in 67?
£1,000? I don't know. It's
No,
a long time ago.
£100?
Bit lower, bit lower.
Lower. Wow.
She got, for all 3 titles combined, she got £45.
What?
Well, the male, I don't know what the male figure was for 67, because the data only goes back to 68, but I'd heard her talk about this in an interview. In 68, the men got £2,000 and the women got 750. And she campaigned really, really hard for equality of prize money in tennis tournaments for a long time. In 1970, one of the things that she did, because the American Lawn Tennis Association wouldn't do anything about this, and they said, you know, the women's game's not interesting, nobody comes to watch that, we don't get any ticket sales, it's just boring, you can play if you like, but we're not really interested. So she, along with another 6 women, left the Lawn Tennis Association, set up the American Women's Tennis Association, and had sponsorship from the Virginia Slims cigarette firm. They all signed up and signed this contract for $1 to become professional players with them. She was also famous for playing in a tennis match against a 55-year-old retired, well, not retired, but a 55-year-old tennis player who'd been pro for a long time, who wanted to prove, he was a real male chauvinist and wanted to prove that men were better than women. And he played against another woman player and had beaten her. And he played against Billie Jean King in the tennis match that is still the most watched live sports event ever. It was watched worldwide by 90 million people. And it was called the Battle of the Sexes. And so they played to the men's tennis rules, and Billie Jean King beat him in straight sets. And she said before the match, she said, you know, I've just got to do this, because otherwise women will never be taken seriously. We will always be the underdog. So I really admire her for the stances that she takes, and that the way that she promotes women's rights and gay rights and so on, all the way through her life. Once she retired, she became involved in promoting women and promoting the ability to gain leadership skills through playing sports, and has a foundation set up now to encourage people to train in leadership skills. In the early 70s, so around the time of the Battle of the Sexes match, she started to realise that she was having feelings for women, having been married to a man for quite some time by that stage. And she had a relationship with a woman called Marilyn Barnett. So that was in the early 70s, and she had relationships with women but kept them secret for the next 10 years or so. In the early 1980s, Marilyn Barnett, when Billie Jean King was about to retire, and she got all sorts of endorsements and sponsorship deals set up that would be sort of her income going forward when she wasn't playing professional tennis anymore. Around that time, Marilyn Barnett went to court to sue her for alimony, and she was very publicly outed by this, and all of a sudden lost all of her endorsements, lost all of her sponsorship. Any income that she would have had disappeared. She'd come from a family where her parents were very, very homophobic, and so suddenly that came into play as well, that her parents had no idea that she was gay, and so she went through a really horrendous, tumultuous time. She still remains very close to her husband, and she and her current partner are godparents to his family. She continues to work tirelessly to try and fix injustice and discrimination. In 2009, President Obama awarded her the Presidential Medal of Freedom for her advocacy for women and her work for LGBT rights. She was the first female athlete ever to get that award. So I just really admire her for everything that she's done and everything that she still stands for. She's 78 now and still going strong. but I think the way that she was outed and the things that she had to cope with and face must have been horrendous. I've also heard her in an interview say that she, you know, bearing in mind that she was outed when she was late 30s, early 40s, that she'd been having relationships with women since her late 20s. She's said in interviews that she was 52, 53 before she really came to terms with her sexuality. So that's 20 years of really not being quite sure, was she right, was she not right, how to cope with her feelings and so on. So I just admire her for being so open to the world as well about her sexuality and things that have happened to her because of that over the years. So I just wanted to share that with you guys.
Thank you, Jude.
That's okay.
She was very brave, really, wasn't she?
She was.
She sometimes used to come across as quite harsh when you saw her talking to other people. I suspect it was actually that she was probably having quite a hard time. And that having that sort of more steely outside exterior maybe was just a protection mechanism, because it sounded like really she was having a pretty tough time having to battle all sorts of things.
Yeah, I agree.
There are two good films, actually. One is a documentary called Battle of the Sexes, and I've not seen that. And then they made a fictionalized, well, mildly fictionalized Hollywood version of it with Emma Stone and Steve Carell, called Battle of the Sexes, that talks about that that tournament, but also the $1 agreement that they had, and the work that she did, and all the interviews I've seen with her as well. She's just so, she appears quite sure of herself. She appears quite, as you say, a bit brutally honest and kind of blunt about things, and just she spent her life working hard for a very good reason, and even now she works for rights so much. She's an amazing person. When you look through what she has been through, it's very interesting. So I would definitely recommend anyone to search out those two films to watch.
I certainly agree with that. She was Martina Navratilova's coach at the time that Martina Navratilova came out, and again that was something where the press had got hold of the story, and Navratilova talked to her and said, you know, this is going to go all over the world, and what do I do? And my parents are in a different country, and how do I cope with this? And so she helped her helped her cope and gave her strategies to deal with it, and said, you have got to get this story out before the press do, because it has to come from you, otherwise they will just tear you apart. And so Navratilova did that, and she came out publicly under her own, I mean, she was forced into it, but it was under her own terms. It was a very different way to the way Billie Jean King was outed. And she was at the same sort of stage of her career of endorsements and sponsorship being so important, and she didn't lose any of her endorsements or sponsorships apparently. And that was I don't think it was even a year after Billie Jean King had been outed. It was very, very close in the time frame, but handled in such a different way. And the fact that she was there and being supportive and helping somebody come through the same situation she'd been through, again, just really admirable thing to do.
It's interesting, isn't it, that I remember the first time being aware of a woman who was gay was probably Martina Navratilova, actually. And not understanding it fully because I was just a kid, but it's interesting that happened in the 80s, wasn't it? And then you think about men in sport, and you know, the first time that men in sport came out, and that's much later, and responded to very, very differently. So, you know, I don't know what my point is really, but it's interesting that there's been quite a shift, that perhaps it is better, you know, it is not easier, but perhaps because of her and Martina Navratilova, that was a benchmark for women potentially, and also maybe the manner of the sport as well, because it's a generally a single person sport. You can do doubles, of course, but you're the focus, aren't you? Whereas you think about men in sports, and as you said previously, rugby players, football players, it's not been so accepted or so kind of widely supported. But it's a different thing, isn't it?
I think there's another aspect to that as well. So Cathy and I have talked before about the first round the world yacht race team, the team that sailed the Maiden, that was an all-woman crew, and how much hassle and aggro they got from the press about, oh well, all these women on a boat all together, they're bound to be lesbians, and just the focus that was put on them that would never have been put on a crew of men was just ridiculous. And I think part of it as well is that women who are high achievers in sport are seen to be quite masculine, and it's kind of almost expected that will have an impact on their sexuality to some degree as well. So
and that equalizing that if you're somehow a sports person, then you must be a certain other person, like that doesn't make sense, this assumption that people have. And also that if you're in close quarters with people, then you must be sexually attracted to those people. It's not to do with the fact that your sexual orientation or not. It's all these very odd assumptions that people have.
Do you think that aligns the level of difficulty faced by different sports people and their sexuality depends on the sport? So if you were a man who was an Olympic gymnast, would being gay be more acceptable? I don't know, versus being a footballer, because of society's perception of the type of sport and the way that, as you said, a woman going into the sports field almost is, because of the amount of physical activity, her body may change to be more muscly and therefore more seen in a more masculine way. I don't know.
I was going to say, I think you're right, Nicole. I think it comes down to the whole crossover between sexuality and gender and this idea of femininity and masculinity within sport. Like if you have, even just going into other areas of culture, ballet, male ballet dancers and like you say, male gymnasts, is that considered a more acceptable sport to be in? And like male footballers, that there isn't actually an openly out gay footballer in modern society. I know that John Fashanu came out, didn't he? But I think he committed suicide, didn't he, because of the pressure and the difficulties that he faced. But yeah, I mean, football considered a very masculine type of sport, and the kind of stigma associated with coming out within that sport. I think it has a massive impact on people's ability to come out, and be comfortable with their sexuality within that sport.
There are people who are out in rugby, aren't there? So I thought there would be more people in football.
There are, yeah. I think that, I mean, the most famous one is Gareth Thomas, where he's no longer within professional rugby playing, but he came out as a kind of pioneer for an openly gay man within the sport of rugby. Yes, I think it's a if you think about the numbers of people within professional football, I think it's a shame that more people do not feel comfortable to come out within the sport. Yeah.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because in women's football, there are quite a lot of people who are out. So the captain of the American football team is openly gay. And that was a big thing with Donald Trump and her, was this kind of friction about the fact that she was openly gay. She's a woman. She is not afraid to stand up to him and to stand up for what's right. And he took affront at that. Whereas in male football, it's a very different atmosphere. And I also remember, another thing, like when I was growing up, thinking about athletes, thinking about Fatima Whitbread, who was an athlete in the 80s. And she was a javelin thrower, so she had to be built to, lob this massive thing, however far she went. And she was a straight woman, but I remember there being a lot of kind of gossip about the fact that she was gay because she looked masculine, you know, and it's this, as you say, it's this idea of what is masculine, what is feminine, and what does that matter, you know, in the world.
I think, you know, what I was saying about the fact that Billie Jean King lost her sponsorships and endorsements has a big impact as well, of people in sports who are looking, as, you know, what are they going to get long term? Have sponsorship deals? Will they be able to build on their professional career once they retire from playing? And I think that is a big barrier to people coming out, to people being open and honest, because of that fear of loss of potential career going forward.
Well, thank you ever so much, Jude. That was very good. And I do recommend for anyone else to have a look at her life history and have a look at the two films. I think you'll learn quite a lot. So we're going to go to Bailey next, which leaves me last. And I feel that I will be an anticlimax because Bailey has told me a little bit about herself, and it sounds like she's an incredibly interesting person. Now I'm picking you up, Bailey. And she's done a photography course and about feminism and female heroes. So this night is meant for her. So I feel very much that after this, I'm going to be an anticlimax. So just prepare yourself for that. Bailey, do you mind introducing yourself and talking about your heroes?
Yeah, so my name's Bailey and I am a demisexual lesbian. Demisexuality is not that heard of in the LGBTQ plus community, but it is just basically where you can only have a sexual attraction to someone if you have an emotional connection with them also. And obviously lesbian being, I find people attractive who identify as female. Like Cathy said, obviously I did a degree in photography, so my idols are photographers. The first one is called Joan E. Byron, who is known as Jeb. She was born in 1944, so she's a 70s photographer, and she is actually part of the LGBTQ community. And she's widely regarded as the first lesbian photographer to compile a photo book of lesbians, specifically for lesbians. And I want to mention that because in the 70s, it was obviously, like Jude said, kind of frowned upon to be part of the LGBTQ community. So Jeb's kind of goal of this photo book was to control massively who the photo book was kind of targeted towards and who had control over purchasing and viewing the photo book, mainly because the people who were photographed in the book weren't out, or because they had children and there was a risk of them losing the custody over the child, or some of them were immigrants that had possibly the chance of being deported if they kind of came out as lesbian. The people who were involved in the photo book, Jeb refers to as muses rather than subjects, just because she found that not as an insult, but kind of, we're human, we're not a subject to be studied, we're human, and I'm going to use you as my muse rather than a subject. The body of work is, she describes as a movement rather than a body of work. She saw it as a propaganda for the LGBTQ community, and she wanted to represent lesbians in the society in the 1970s because there weren't much representation of them, and essentially it's just about being human, and she just wanted to have that visibility for lesbians and kind of have them in society. And the second person, again, is a photographer called Cindy Sherman. She was born in 1955, and she spent her career making statements about popular constructs of female identity. Unlike Jeb, she uses herself as the muse, so she dresses herself up as characters. For example, her most famous work is where she dresses up as a housewife and a classic movie star, and she really throws herself into kind of the Hollywood makeup, being sexualized for the male gaze, and kind of why does the woman have to look this particular way in society. And she really throws herself into that, and she questions femininity and the identity and basically female representation in the media and society. The characters are not necessarily about herself, like Jeb's work, but instead to mirror the preconceived kind of stereotype and kind of portrayal of feminism in itself, and just really challenges it and makes you think about everything you see, how women are dressed compared to males in the movies. Why do females have to be full glam when males don't necessarily have to be? And just challenges that whole stigma, really. And I found Cindy Sherman is really important in that, because it kind of relates back to, again, the lesbian community of lesbians being traditionally known for females who have short hair, who dress like men, who have short nails, who don't paint the nails, don't necessarily look after themselves. And it just basically challenges all of the stereotypes that lesbians have.
Thank you, Bailey. That's great. I've not heard of either of those people, but it's interesting because you were talking about that. What is masculinity? What is femininity? What is the male gaze? You know, what makes a woman? You know, what are these stereotypes? Which is what we've kind of been discussing with different things. But that sounds like going back to the 1970s, and it sounds like an amazing piece of work.
Yeah, I think the other thing as well is kind of how the females were, like, not so much females, but how the photographers were portraying it as well. So it wasn't necessarily a photo shoot. It was kind of like documentary style, like, this is happening. It's not just for the entertainment of other people. These are people's lives, and this is actually happening. And, you know, it's not something that's made up. It's just what some people, who they are, essentially.
Oh, that was really interesting that you said a lot of the women in Jeb's book, that she tried to keep control over who saw it because of protecting their privacy. How did she do that? How did she go about doing that?
So she only she didn't sell the book. She only released it to a very small group of people. She didn't make any money from her photography for a lot of years, for the simple fact that it wasn't released to the public in general.
Right.
It was essentially the muses that were in the book. Their location was in the book, their first names, and the year that it was taken. So essentially, it was information that could be detrimental to certain people.
Brave of the women to take part in that.
It was, yeah,
definitely. And I think it's that trust as well, of trusting a photographer that much to have that amount of control over their work and kind of their privacy, to not let it get out of control or be released to the police or anything like that. And I think it's just, would that have been the same amount of trust, for example, if it was a male photographer who wasn't part of the LGBTQ community, or if it was another female photographer who wasn't part of the community? I just think it gives a lot for someone to kind of think about.
I wonder if you'd have the same level of trust now with the internet and everything, because I think, you know, I think the internet has provided people with a ways of victimizing others in a way. Well, maybe social media and the internet. I mean, there's good things, but there's also, it's easy for things to get out of hand and be shared with people it shouldn't be. So you wonder if people would be quite that trusting in modern times. But they obviously trusted her, didn't they?
Yeah. I think because she put so much emphasis on kind of the people who were part of it not being subjects, it it was muses. It wasn't, I'm not studying you as if you're an animal or if it's not natural. I think it's because it was emphasised that you were a muse essentially. Then I think that kind of gains the trust as well.
Do you think it was a product of its time? So do you think that protection was born out of a place of, look, this is, within the culture, this isn't widely accepted, this isn't something which is widely known or discussed, it's something which is maybe shooed away or not spoken about, and that lent itself to, or that meant that that protection was needed. Like, for example, I know that Sarah, you mentioned about how in modern society it would be this risk of images being put out there and exploited almost, but there may be, in modern society, it may be more acceptable for women to be, appear in images and not have to fear the repercussions of those images because of the modern society that we live in, or that we hope that we aspire to. But in its day, was it more about the culture and the fact that this wasn't widely discussed and known about, that meant that it had to be hidden? What do you think?
I think you're right about us. Maybe people might be braver about, but it doesn't mean you necessarily want to share. You might be brave about undertaking an image like that, but it doesn't mean you want to share it.
The world.
And I think nowadays, that's become the problem, isn't it? That people feel it's their right to share images of other people without, people do it all the time, don't they?
Yeah.
And actually, that might not feel right to you. And it's that privacy, even if what you might do in one space wouldn't mean you do it on another.
And it sounds like, from what Bailey was saying, that was part of it, wasn't it? It wasn't that because nowadays you just take pictures of things like it's your meal, or like it's a document of what your day is doing. Whereas it sounds like very much then it wasn't that the women, they weren't subjects, they were part of the journey, part of the story. It was a story that they were making together, that they were documenting together. So it wasn't just like, they were what your fry up looked like that day. It was a relationship that she had. But it's interesting thinking about those kind of the two ways that we document things. I'm surrounded by pictures of my kids. I love the pictures of my kids, and there's that, isn't there? And it's that you're experiencing, it's all part of your life, it's part of a moment in time that's precious. And then there's a way of documenting things that is literally, this is my achievement, which is this wonderful fry up that I got from Nigella. This is my wonderful ice cream that I bought that's £5 that looks wonderful, and it's again, I don't know my point, but it's that thing of being part of something, part of a community, part of an experience, part of a story, versus being on the outside, just kind of ticking boxes, almost like, this is, these are the things I've achieved today. These are the hits I've got today, almost like you've got on social media. You get your hits, don't you? You get your tweets, you've got your engagements and things like that. And clearly for Jeb, it wasn't about engagements from other people. It was about the engagement from the people that she was photographing.
And Bailey, when you became interested in both of these women through your course, is that right?
Yeah, photography. I struggled a lot with my sexuality and kind of did the transition from being straight to bisexual, and then finally coming to terms with the fact that I am a lesbian. And I just kind of not studied photography, but kind of looked at it from afar. And then as I started researching more and more of past kind of the wedding photography and stuff, and like being a photographer can be so much more than just this one thing, who kind of, whenever I say I'm a photographer, people initially think that I'm a wedding photographer. That is the only genre of photography that could ever be. When you kind of get past that and look into it more and kind of look at it being an art form and having like this way of expressing yourself. It's just a lot more. And then obviously I went on to do my degree in photography, and just basing it off of sexuality and feminism, and kind of, as I like the idea of when I pass away, something that I've done is always going to be here and it's going to be for something. And I like creating a body of work that is essentially people in 60, 70 years time are going to be in my position now, speaking to other people about my work. So I just like to be involved in that.
So that's really interesting, Bailey. So what I suppose I was interested in is, what work are you still doing? Are you doing your photography, and what are you, what sort of, do you mind sharing what sort of work you're doing, and does that still, are you still working with ideas around sexuality and things in that work?
Yes, so I'm just doing it in free time at the moment. So one of my recent bodies of work that I'm working on is basically just sexuality and how sexual encounters aren't this just magical thing surrounded by fireworks, and how you have this connection with people. It can be disgusting and you can just get filled with yourself, and so I'm representing that through fruit, the women's organs as beetroots, grapefruits, people eating grapefruits, lesbians, documenting stuff like that.
And so I hope you don't mind me asking more questions, but it sounds really interesting. And I wonder, do you share your work with others? And if so, how do you find people respond? So is it positive? Do you feel that there is some prejudice out there?
I think because obviously people that really look for my work are in the same kind of genre, so like feminism, they are really into feminism. There's not so much as negative feedback as there is constructive criticism. And I think, going back to obviously when I studied my degree, I had a male tutor and a female tutor, and I could tell the clear kind of distinction as, okay, the female photographer was a lot more interested and kind of got it, rather than the male was kind of just, okay, but why are you doing this kind of thing? He didn't understand it as much as the female tutor did. But I think as well, now that I'm starting a new project and kind of getting into the nitty gritty, kind of the female's organs aren't just kind of this pretty flower that has been represented in the media and stuff. It is, we bleed, we have discharge, we've got pubes, we've got everything, I think
I've never considered my female organ to be a flower. But I'm very impressed that you consider yours to be a flower.
But it's kind of looking at that, and I feel like that this body of work may meet that kind of criticism of, well, why do you want to share that kind of thing? But I think it's important to kind of represent it, and every vagina is different, kind of thing.
There's a show on Channel 4, I watched a little bit of it, about women showing their vaginas. I don't know if you've seen it, but there's one woman who's incredibly brave because she's actually transsexual. But if you haven't watched it, you might find it interesting.
But I've got to say, I've always found all genitalia very strange to look at, male and female. It's just there's like, the boobs are good. I like, breasts are fine, buttocks are fine, everything else is just a bit weird. But is that societal? Is that just the fact that that's, genitals are odd? Jude's just laughing away in the background.
Now you're talking, we really should have sorted out screen sharing, because it would have been really lovely to see some of your work.
Yeah, I mean, I could get some off if, I don't know if you can see that.
Right, we've got something up.
If I do this.
Oh, wow.
So this is an old body of work, which was kind of feminism. and obviously the girl power in the back and everything like that, and she's actually wearing a blazer. So it's kind of representing kind of the workman, the workmen wear blazers, and why can't females wear blazers and feel empowered, and why do we have to wear makeup, and kind of it's just washing away that kind of stigma and kind of stereotype of what we have to do. And there's kind of another one there from the same project.
But can I ask, is the writing, is that in lipstick?
It is, yeah.
Fantastic. I like that. That's very good.
And then from this project, obviously, vagina as a grapefruit.
I really
And
love that one.
pomegranate
That's quite
seeds.
Pomegranate, yeah.
That's quite an, I don't know, but I like it.
It's quite an aggressive picture in my mind.
To be very in your face.
But it's an image that if you took the image of a vagina in that way, would it be as powerful?
It's something to think about, isn't it?
But your photographs are incredible, Bailey.
Thank you. And then there's just the final one with body hair and fruit and boobs, and yeah.
That was brilliant, Bailey. Thank you ever so much for sharing that.
I put the if you haven't seen the 100, I found it's 100 vaginas, and I only watched part of it.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'll give that a look.
So, Bailey, how much do you mind us asking questions?
You can ask whatever you want. I'll try answer.
Okay. So when we did the other panel that Rick and Alistair spoke at, it was helpful for me to understand a little bit around their perspectives in terms of healthcare. And I wondered whether you have any experiences that you would like to share or that you think are important for us to hear.
I think the only thing that popped into my mind when you said that was kind of going to the GPs for personal issues, and instead of the way that the phrase questions. So for example, when you go to the doctors for whatever reason and they ask, oh, could you be pregnant? And I obviously say no, because there's no way, unless I'm Virgin Mary, there's no way that I could be pregnant. And I obviously very bluntly say, oh no, there's no chance. And instead of kind of taking that as face value, they'll ask, oh, well, I can see you're not on any contraception. Okay, yeah, I'm a lesbian. So, and I think that's probably the only negative really that I can think of in regards to healthcare from my perspective, that I can really offer. But I think just like kind of, instead of assuming or kind of generalizing that, not even for the sake of LGBTQ.
It's really interesting that you picked that one, because actually it is a question we ask, and lots of people say that they don't think, and sometimes what they really mean is I hope not I'm definitely not. And actually when you get down to it, people could be, but they're hoping that they're not. And I wonder if there is, maybe, because it probably causes as much difficulty with anybody that they feel untrusted. Maybe we need to ask in a different way, but I'm not quite sure how you ask.
I think
it's difficult.
It is, yeah. I just, obviously, I'm not, when me and my friends who are also lesbians discuss just stuff in general, that is something that comes up quite a lot. And I don't think it's intentional whatsoever, but I just think it's kind of just how it is. And I
wonder, Bailey, one of the difficulties now is the referral form for an X-ray actually says, is the patient pregnant? And if you tick no, a box comes up and says justification. So you have to type in that box why this woman cannot be pregnant. And if you have any suggestions of a less clunky way to explore that, that would be great.
I wonder whether, if you got the person's permission, do you mind if I just put in capitals, massive lesbian, that is why she is not pregnant, or something like that. But obviously it's I find that box incredibly difficult, because it comes up for all women, and you have to put on, are they postmenopausal? Well, some women don't want to kind of reference that, are they in same-sex relationships? Are they just single? Like, just because someone's not on contraception doesn't mean that they're a lesbian either. It could just be that they are aromantic, that they're not, or they're just single,
or that they have a sick partner, male partner, and so there's all sorts. It's probably a horrible question, probably for almost everybody, and I suppose it's how do we are, but I expect I suppose it probably gets as negative views as, but we have to maybe think about how do we ask it.
I think it comes back to what we said on the training session. It's about avoid making assumptions, just discuss things in a sensitive manner, and don't presume anything. And how do you do that very sensitively when you actually need to know the facts for a clinical reason? It's not easy, is it?
Maybe I need to signpost it and better and say, I'm filling in this form, and on it I have to put a justification.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is about putting a lesbian as a reason for, you could be a lesbian and still trying to conceive, I suppose, in a same-sex relationship. So,
or trying to conceive.
Yeah. And you can also be accused of being prejudiced the other way. So I was speaking to a patient who, being very anonymous here, was from the LGBTQ plus community, and I asked about whether they had children, and they kind of laughed at me and said, I just told you this about my sexuality. And I kind of said back to them, but that doesn't mean that you can't start a family or have a family.
No. Yeah, so
I was being
pre-warning.
I was being very sarcastic about that, because I am aware that lesbians can have babies too. So I don't want anyone to think that I'm being massively prejudiced there. But it is difficult, because it is quite a triggering question as well, because what if someone's just had a miscarriage?
Yeah.
What if someone's had 3 stillbirths? And it is difficult, because as you say, Rick, you need to know that for the clinical reason that if I'm going to give you an X-ray and you are pregnant, this causes a risk to your baby. But I guess it's just, as you say, it's how do you ask sensitively? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think it's the question in itself. I think it's kind of the questions that follow. So for my instance, it was the GP saying, well, I can see you're not on any contraception. And to me, I would only really need contraception for sexual activities if I was in a relationship with a man. And that is just something that the GP presumed. So I don't think it's necessarily the question in itself. I think it's how it's portrayed, how it's said, and then the follow-up questions after that.
Maybe what we should be doing is, instead of asking the question, explaining why we need to know that somebody's not pregnant.
Yeah, we're not
the same if we see somebody with abdominal pain, tummy pain, and it could be an ectopic pregnancy, maybe saying that actually, pregnancy is could cause a very severe type of pain. Is there any chance that you could be? I think the trouble is sometimes if people think you are a fertile woman and could be pregnant, they may think that you've not understood the way that they phrase the question. But maybe that's about their way of asking, and we probably just need to not just jump in with these questions in the way that we do, maybe pre-warning people or justifying, trying to explain why we're asking them would be better, wouldn't it?
Sorry, that felt like it was a little bit of a tangent away from pomegranate seeds and grapefruit vaginas.
It was fabulous photographs. I really do love them. They're really lovely. You did a lovely art collection, didn't you, at Sunnybank? Doing something, being maybe somewhere a safe space, a space where people can appreciate might be something to think about.
Yeah, I mean, Bailey, I'm up for doing more exhibitions, so I would love I'd love your artwork. That sounds fantastic. And did you do your degree show online or anything like that we could link to? Because it'd be great if you could send me the link. I would love to put it in the link to the talk, if you felt comfortable doing that.
I think it's interesting with that, Cathy, in terms of, do you then have to, and I throw this to everybody, have a warning to say that if you're watching or following this link, even though it's not sexually explicit, it's very powerful, isn't it? Do you need to forewarn that it's sexual content?
I would probably put it that it's to do with sexuality and feminism. And most people might expect that there may be something a little bit explicit. I think if it was a picture that had F words all over the place, then I'd be more explicit about it. But I think it's just tricky. Fruit. How would you put it, Bailey?
I think it's just a fruit, but it's almost a more powerful image than if you'd have photographed a vagina, isn't it?
Yeah. See, it's difficult for me to kind of advise, because from my kind of photographer feminist side, I would say no, just because I would want that shock factor. But then from a professional kind of working at a healthcare centre, maybe yes, because not everyone would want to see that and might not be prepared. So it's difficult, but
yeah. I don't think you'd probably want to show your whole first exhibit in a medical centre in Bradford because it would lose the shock factor somewhat, and some little old ladies, I bet, would love it. Some little old men might be a little bit overcome by the image of a fruit vagina. And I bet you'd get a few old ladies going, "That's what it looks like, dear." But I think they're fantastic images, and I think you've got a really good eye for there's something very nice about the contrast and the colour and the bluntness of it is really nice. I liked it.
Thank you.
Well, as I said, mine's going to be less exciting because it's not personal. But however, I still really found this woman very exciting. Now, I tweeted about this lady during LGBT plus History Month, and her name is Sophia Jex Blake. She was a lady who was born in 1840 to quite a well-to-do family. And she was brought up to be interested in a little bit of education, but not too much. And so she then decided that she wanted to go into education. Her parents were trying to kind of direct her towards getting married. And strange enough, she didn't have that much interest in marriage. And she wanted to kind of explore things. So she wanted to go into education. She wanted to travel. She went to, I think, Switzerland. She went to the United States. She helped out in a hospital in America. She trained to be the bookkeeper and the pharmacist for the hospital. And then she decided that she wanted to be a doctor. She wanted to attend Harvard, and she tried to get admission, and she was declined because she was a woman. So she ended up coming back home because her father died. And so she decided that she wanted to go into medicine in Great Britain. Now, England, that was just not going to happen. So she tried going north of the border into Scotland because it seemed like it might be a little bit more palatable up there. So she went to Edinburgh University in 1869, and she decided that she wanted to apply there to be a doctor. And they originally admitted her, and then they said, "Oh, wait a minute, no, we can't do that because she's a woman." And so she started a campaign, and she and 6 other women ended up campaigning to be admitted, and they were known as the Edinburgh Seven. So that in the end, they ended up going into separate classes. They had to pay higher tuition than the men who were there. They weren't allowed to train at the same time. They weren't allowed to train at the hospital. because they were women. And then it came to the point where they were supposed to do their examination in what's known as the surgeon's hall, and 200 protesters stood outside and refused to let them in. And it ended up becoming internationally famous, like around the world. It was famous of these Edinburgh Seven. They put a lawsuit against the school so that they could complete their medical education. They won the suit, but lost an appeal. And in the end, they just got fed up. And she ended up moving to Switzerland, learning German, completing her medical degree in German, and then coming back and being one of the first female doctors at an Edinburgh hospital. And when she was at the hospital, she then helped to found a hospital for women and children who could not afford medical care. She helped found a training hospital, and she also helped found one in London as well. And she helped educate a lot of female students to be doctors. She had a couple of female relationships throughout this time, which is why she wasn't interested in marriage. One of which was called Octavia Hill, and they knew each other when she was reasonably young. They actually lived together for a time, and then she was heartbroken when they split up. But that kind of propelled her on to kind of more insistent on kind of developing and progressing in the medical world. And then she fell in love with one of her students. I'm sorry, her name's lost on my things. Her name was Todd, was the surname, and I can't remember her first name. But she ended up living with her partner down in Sussex, and that's where they retired together. And after she died, her partner wrote a biography of her, brought all personal papers together, made it into this biography, published it, and then destroyed all the personal papers. And then a few months later, her partner committed suicide through grief. And that was just an amazing life. I was just like, oh, Lordy, that was just more than I could ever achieve in 5 lifetimes. And this woman did all of this. And it was just amazing. I just thought, you're the reason why, or you're one of the reasons why women can become doctors, why we have the ease that we have now, why so many women are in the medical field. You've laid this foundation for all these people. And just, it was just amazing. So yeah, Sophia Jex-Blake was an amazing woman. So I thought, you're bloody good, aren't you? And I was very, very interested. Margaret Todd, yes, Bailey, thank you. Did you just Google that? Fantastic, thank you so much, you've saved me. So yes, Margaret Todd, and she was a student of hers, and they fell in love, and then were together for the rest of their lives, which is amazing.
Thanks, Cathy. That was an amazing story. How did you first discover Sophia Jex-Blake? Sorry, did you mention that at the start? How did you first become aware of her?
Well, so for the LGBT plus history, and this was before you did all these fantastic tweets that I could just rob and retweet, I thought, oh, what I'll do is I'll look up historical LGBT plus figures who we might not know about. And I think she was maybe the second or third person that I came across. And I just thought, wow, I've just, how have we not heard of this story? Being doctors, how have we not heard of this? How is this not more widely publicized? Because this woman was a trailblazer in all manners of ways. She went into education when her family told her not to. She went to America when she was told not to. She moved to Switzerland when she was told not to. She became a pharmacist because she couldn't be a doctor in America. She tried to get into Harvard. She tried to get into everywhere. She took them to court. She protested. She convinced 6 other women to come along and join her, and then when that all went horribly wrong, she then moved to a foreign country, learned a foreign language, did a degree in that foreign language, got to be a doctor, and then came back and went, well, up yours, I'm now a doctor, admit me to your hospital, where I'm going to found a hospital for women and children that I'm going to let them come and not pay money for, and then I'm going to train more women. to come into this and be doctors, so stuff you. And I was like, wow.
I feel a little unworthy of the profession, Cathy, when you describe such an amazing woman as that.
I know, I practically got fed it, you know, on a platter. But yeah, I thought I was trailblazing, you know, failing my A levels a little bit, going into clearing, doing a 4-year degree, and then doing medicine. I was like, oh, that's quite hard going, isn't it? But, you know, it turns out not so much.
No, not so much. You didn't get on a boat and then a plane and, well, more boats probably.
Well, I lived in Dundee for 4 years, so, you know, it's almost like a foreign language. No disrespect to any Scottish people, by the way.
Just maybe just to discuss her relationship a little bit. I mean, did that, obviously she was, like you said, amazing trailblazer. What, I think I'm just thinking about other historical figures who I looked at. So there was Anne Lister, who I think, was she around at the similar sort of time, or maybe Anne Lister was a bit before her time, wasn't she?
I think it was around the 1800s, wasn't it?
Yeah. And obviously Anne Lister's relationships were very much a part of the history and the, you know, the what's documented in her, within her lifetime. Is it the same sort of thing for Sophia Jex-Blake then? Is that, I mean, I don't know how much information do we know about her relationships and
well, I'd be interested actually to have a look at her biography, because as I say, it was written by her partner and it was based on personal papers which she then destroyed. So it would be interesting to find out why she did that, and then why she went on to commit suicide, and was that to do with, you know, the grief and the maybe privacy around the relationship? I don't know, but that was, so she died in Jex-Blake died in 1912, and then the biography was released in 1918, and then Margaret Todd died just shortly after that. And whether she committed suicide because she felt like she'd done her job with doing the biography, or I don't know. It'd be interesting to find out.
Yeah.
Do you know much about Anne Lister? Have you?
No, not much. I mean, I've never watched a TV series. I've never really got into that. I don't know if other people have. I just, the only information that I know was this small amount of research that I did for the tweet that I did on her within LGBT plus History Month. I think that she was relationships, her female relationships were very much a massive part of her life, and I think she had a number of different partners, didn't she? And it was, I think she chronicled the relationships she'd had with these women in her diaries, and some of them were quite explicit, I think, from what I understand.
She wrote them all in a code.
Yeah.
So
what I find fascinating is that I think, was it a nephew or something, one of her family members discovered these diaries and then deciphered the code, and then because of the content of these diaries and how it was all taboo and sexually explicit, he kind of kept it all hidden, didn't he, for a number of years, which I find fascinating. You know, it's just sort of celebrating her life. I think it was obviously the culture and the stigma. I don't know what it was, but it was kept hidden for a number of years after that.
Thinking about that, because reading about Anne Frank, I mean, a very different person, but her diary was of course recovered, and it was published by her father. But again, to begin with, explicit content was removed from that when she'd written about the person that she fancied. That was all removed because you know, and then later added back in. But again, you know, that's someone who's related to that person, whether firstly, you know, obviously it was his daughter, he'd lost his whole family, but I wonder whether part of it was also like, this is to do with, you know, the sexual awakening of my daughter, this is to do with, you know, her finding womanhood, and I, you know, that's something that I don't want to recognize in her. And also it shouldn't be out there in the world because she's a woman, and that's not the sort of thing that happens, you know. And she wasn't even a woman at that point, she was a child, well, you know, on the cusp of womanhood, and that shouldn't be in the public gaze, that women shouldn't be seen like this, or seen to think like this and want like this and dream like this and have these urges.
But it's a massive part. It's everything about who that person is, isn't it? You know, who they find attractive, how they want to be seen, and their, you know, the relationships with other people. It's inextricably linked to, you know, that person, and to deny somebody of that, I think is horrendous. You know, it's, you know, covering up the fact that that's who this person is, just because of their somebody else's perceived idea that this is wrong, or, you know, it's incorrect for that to be known. I think, you know, if I just think if it happened to me, and I had written some diaries, or I'd written a chronicle of my life, and you know, the relationship I have with my other half was omitted from that, I'd be mightily pissed off. You know, I think it'd be such a, yeah.
Anne Lister wrote this in code. So why did she write it in code?
Yeah.
Obviously because she didn't want other people to read it and understand it. So how long do you go on protecting that? You know, yes, it's a written documentation of what went on, and yes, obviously people can decipher it, but she didn't write it for other people to read. She wrote it for her own record.
Yeah. So there is the argument, should this have been seen by anybody at all?
Well, yeah.
But then the other argument to that is that because of the society that she was in at that moment in time, it had to be kept secret because it was frowned upon. And if it had been 100 years, 150 years later, she would have been, you know, it would have been more different. Yeah, exactly.
There was something I saw at the weekend about the ladies of Llangollen, who were a lesbian couple who came from Wexford in Ireland. Their family were in Wexford in Ireland, and when their relationship was discovered, they were handed out of the country, and they moved to Wales and settled in Llangollen, had a lovely little cottage there, and were accepted by the local community as a married couple. And they became really famous, and they had people like Charles Darwin and the Duke of Wellington and all sorts of, you know, society people go and visit them. I don't know if it was kind of like a properly visiting them, or if it was kind of a bit of a novelty, but there's still sort of a tourist area around these two women. And I thought that was really interesting in sort of Victorian times, when, you know, legislation, because Queen Victoria didn't have the imagination to know what women could do with each other. So therefore lesbianism couldn't happen. For these two women to be so publicly recognised back then.
Cathy, I was going to say, do you think it has something to do with? I mean, I don't know. I'm just surmising here, but the fact that it was the legality of same-sex relationships was different for men than it was for women back in the 1800s and 1900s, wasn't it? In terms of the law, did that affect how I don't know, how open women were to discussing same-sex relationships and lesbianism at that time? Or, I mean, it was, if you were a man in a same-sex relationship and that was discovered, you were killed, you were hanged or murdered, or executed. But that wasn't the case for female same-sex relationships. So did that affect potentially how comfortable women felt in being open, being out? I'm not sure.
Maybe it was just more acceptable for women to have female friends, and, you know, like to live as spinsters together, and whether it was just much more accepted. I mean, my great aunt, she lost her fiance during the war, and she lived with the same old lady in the house for the rest of her life. Now, retrospectively, I wonder, you know, was there more to it than that, or were they just friends? I don't know, and I will never know because I was very young when they died. But you think, you know, is that part of why why it was more acceptable? It's just it was fine for women to live together, for women to be friends, you know, that because also when you were a spinster, that was it. You weren't allowed to be in male company, but female company was fine. And it also made me wonder about Sophia and just thinking, well, she wasn't interested in marriage, and we know why, because marriage wasn't allowable between same sex, but whether that's what also just drove her to want more from life. You know, I you know, my family want me to be married to a man. I don't want that. How do I get around that? Well, I just go and, you know, blaze my own trail and do my own things, and then no one can question why I'm not married because I'm so busy doing all these other things. I don't know.
I think it's interesting when you talk about perhaps the different experiences of male gay couples versus female couples historically. And my husband and I were talking about this before the session, and it made me question whether some of that comes down to the role in society of the white man, the heterosexual white man in position of power, and how do these men in positions of power even today view lesbian couples versus gay couples, and you know that it might be okay for a man to perhaps watch lesbian porn or to find two women together as something non-threatening. Actually, our interpretations in society, I don't know what you think, but I think that lesbian couples in some ways perhaps are less threatening, more accepted.
I guess we could ask Bailey if she didn't mind answering, because of course I've never had to be in that situation where I'm judged by men in that way. I don't think you have, Nicole. I don't think Jude. Rick certainly. Well, Rick's been judged in other ways, I imagine, for being a gay man.
I think it's different how female gay couples are seen compared to male gay couples. I think there is a difference, but whether that's accepted in society because of certain cultural norms and as you say, that toxic heterosexual white male kind of figure.
I think it just goes back to the male gaze. I think it's a very not old, but kind of thing that's happened for a lot of years, where females are for the entertainment and the enjoyment of males. So I think when kind of two females are put together, males are just very, me and Lucy have had it in nightclubs. Oh, you're lesbians, just kiss. Let me take a photo of you kissing and stuff like that. It's just, I wouldn't say accepted in the lesbian community, but it's very common to kind of have that, oh, well, kiss her then. Or even, for example, that I was in a nightclub with one of my friends where she was being talked to by a guy that she didn't want to be spoken to by. And I said, oh, can you leave my girlfriend alone, pretending that she was my girlfriend. And instead of being, yeah, that's fine, it was, well, kiss her then if she's your girlfriend, kind of thing. And I just think it's that male gaze kind of, I don't know if you've heard about Laura Mulvey. She's a writer who did this very famous essay about the male and female gaze. But she goes into a lot of depth about it, and it's just essentially females are for male entertainment, especially Oakley. But yeah, just for male entertainment and male enjoyment, essentially.
So that comes back to the whole sort of historical toxic patriarchal society that we live in, I think, doesn't it? I think, and yeah, that's a really interesting point, I think, and that kind of explains perhaps behaviours within society. I don't know, do you find that happens from other gay men, you say, as well, Billie, or I mean, is it?
Not so much gay men. I think with the LGBTQ community, even transgender and drag queens, nightclubs, like whenever we hear someone say that, obviously straight men and straight women go to the nightclubs as well.
Yeah.
Whenever, for example, if someone said that to one of my gay friends, I would pull someone on that, and they would do the same. But I think if you were surrounded in a straight club and someone said that to you, no one would bat an eyelid, and in fact they would probably join in and kind of chant you to kiss.
Well, there was that case, wasn't there, about the gay couple down in London where they got beaten up by teenagers because they refused to kiss each other. And it's absolutely disgusting, disgusting that people feel that that's acceptable.
And I think it's people thinking that it's their right as well, to have that control over someone's sexuality and kind of, well, you owe me this kind of mentality, when in actual fact it's not that case whatsoever.
No, and I think my thought really was, with this male gaze theory fits into this idea that it's men who were creating the rules in the 1800s, and therefore perhaps lesbians were not viewed in the same way as male gay couples. I don't know.
I don't know if it was because obviously it was created by this straight cisgendered male, and in their eyes gay and lesbians didn't exist or whatever, but I think it's definitely just based on that ideology of kind of females being their toys and their entertainment.
And something
you could go back to
entertaining about two women, whereas do men find two men sexually entertaining in the same way?
It's something to think about. I think it's kind of, it can be interpreted in loads of different ways, and I just don't think it would ever be answered, to be quite honest.
I also think it comes down to the point that we made on the training, which is about how a man might engage in sexual activity with another man, but not identify as gay, and similarly, I'm sure, equally with women, and it sort of blurs the lines between sexuality, sexual attraction.
But I also wonder whether straight men would have an issue if it was two straight women kissing, and as Bailey was saying, like this idea of lesbians as butch, short hair, if they actually came across an actual gay couple, how comfortable would they be in that situation? And Bailey, from your experience, you were saying, well, actually men have felt quite comfortable saying, go and kiss her if she's your girlfriend. But if they'd been presented with two of those more butch lesbians on the spectrum, because obviously everything is a spectrum, isn't it? How comfortable would they feel saying to them, well, go and kiss each other if you're girlfriends? Whether they feel that those women would still be almost their property in order that they can direct, you're my entertainment, or whether they would feel less comfortable because they're slightly different representations of femininity on that scale.
I agree, Cathy. I think it even goes back to straight men who find either trans women or transvestite men attractive because they personify a female form which they kind of find attractive, don't they? So that whole outward expression of gender and how that's perceived or enjoyed by somebody else.
I think from all these discussions we've been having, I think the thing that I've been more and more aware of is that everything's just a scale, isn't it? It's just a sliding scale, and it's okay to be anywhere on that point. But it's just about admitting that to yourself, isn't it? And just saying that's fine, and that this isn't a fixed thing. This isn't a binary thing. These things flow. And for some people it flows very much up and down, and some people it doesn't, and that's okay. But it's just allowing someone else to be on that scale, and allowing someone else to be different to yourself, and allowing someone else to represent themselves in different ways. And we talked previously about like Eddie Izzard. I've seen some absolute horrendous trolling about the fact that Eddie Izzard was previously identifying as a transvestite male and is now a woman, and therefore, you know, he's had his joy as a man, and now he's trying to break into women, and, you know, trying to take our place in the world, and how wrong that is. It's like, no, this person is just this person, and they've just found that they can present themselves in a different way, and they feel comfortable in a different way, and that's okay, and it doesn't affect your life. It doesn't stop you being the person you are. It's this idea of entitlement, that you're okay to comment on other people's existence.
I think it was very similar for Caitlyn Jenner as well when she was transitioning. And I think it's kind of going back to Jeb. Obviously, in the 70s, there weren't so much social media, so it weren't as easy to kind of target or it was easy to discriminate, but it's kind of not as easy of just logging into your Instagram account or Facebook account or Twitter and writing whatever you want and then leaving that and going to do your normal work and stuff like that. I think it's just too easy at the moment to kind of put your input in, whether it's negative or positive, on someone else's life, like you say, that you feel you're entitled to kind of have an opinion on when you're not, and especially if it's not hurting you or anyone else.
Well, I feel that that's brought us to a natural conclusion, and I feel like all these discussions, we've gone on a really interesting journey around all the issues, and not all the issues, lots of issues. There's still a lot to explore, but I'm very grateful to Jude for telling us about Billie Jean King. But also, I'd like to say I'm really grateful to Bailey, because not only have you shared some fantastic heroes, but also your own work, and talked a lot about your own experiences. And obviously, I'm very grateful on behalf of myself and others for your honesty and getting to see some of your experience in life. So thank you ever so much. And thank you to Nicole, Rick and Sarah for being part of our audience. And I hope at some point, Bailey, will be able to show off more of your artwork. Thank you ever so much.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.